viewers, welcome for the lecture series on tourism. In this session, we will be discussing the topic Sustainable Tourism Development. This episode can be studied under the following 5 subheadings. They are Introduction, Sustainable Tourism Development, Planning for Sustainable Tourism Development, Tourism and Environment, and finally, Community-Based Tourism Development. Let us start with the first module, Introduction. Tourism development and its impact are the two major areas of concern in tourism. The development of tourism throughout the world has brought immense economic opportunities and benefits, but it has put immense pressure on the natural environment, socio-cultural adverse effect on local environment and local community. While sharing the benefits of tourism development, the communities at the destination has been on the receiving end. The relationship between mass tourism and culture has resulted in the change in the value system. The community structure, family relationship, collective traditional lifestyles, the morality of the host community are greatly influenced by tourism. Sustainable approach. The absence of sustainable approach in the process of tourism development is more discernible in the case of developing countries, where inadequate legal and social controls have given way to the defaulters. These defaulters have come out with their narrow agenda of gaining commercial profit over the existing socio-cultural environment. The major area of neglect is the careful concern for the ecology and environment as well as socio-cultural aspect. The whole debate focuses on the inculcation of a sustainable approach towards ecological, environmental, cultural aspects and then tourism development. In the second half of the 20th century, tourism has developed into a major economic, cultural and social phenomenon. Because of its economic benefits, many countries were fascinated to develop mass tourism, overlooking its negative impact. The economic potency of tourism can be realized from the amount of wealth and employment it generates. Moving on to the second module, Sustainable Tourism Development. The idea of sustainable development is of recent concept. This idea was promoted by Brundtland Report in 1987 and acknowledged by the international community in the Rio Summit in 1992. It was again discussed at the World Summit on Sustainable Development at Johannesburg in 2002. It has been much debated at United Nations and other international forums by the academicians, scientists, NGOs and other concerned people. However, most emphasis has been on environmental sustainability only. The global effect of overusing the natural resources may lead to undesirable consequences, but the concept of sustainable development is much wider than the environmental factor. Sustainable development strategies have a number of other features also. The destination should be developed from the present competitive position to a more desirable future competitive position. They adopt a long-term strategy for its sustainability. They involve the vision, objectives, directions and commitment. They are complex in nature and involve many stakeholders. All the stakeholders in the tourism industry must make some hard decisions. Concept of sustainable tourism development. Before understanding the principles behind sustainable tourism development, it is necessary to understand its conceptual development. During 1980s, it became apparent that major global environmental changes were occurring suddenly, and silently. The world slowly started realizing the changes taking place in the global environment. The concept of sustainable tourism development came from this realization. It was first mentioned in 1987 in a report published by the World Commission on Environment and Development. It identified the sustainable development as development that meets the needs of present generation without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their own demand. In other words, it means utilizing all resources at present, making enough provision for use by future generations. The report identifies the following key principles. Intergenerational equity. It means the range of activities and the scope of ecological diversity available to future generations are at least as broad as experienced by current generations. Intergenerational equity further aims at social justice and poverty alleviation, improving the well-being of the common people and not just benefiting the rich class alone. The public should accept the tourism project and participate in it. In other words, decisions shall not be imposed on the local community, but they should be taken into confidence and made to participate in it. Environmental protection is a precondition for any development. A detailed study has to be undertaken by the expert team to assess the environmental impact. All available options shall be discussed before coming to final decisions. Tourism is most ideally suited to adopt sustainability as a guiding principle. Tourism except transport does not consume non-renewable resources. Resources used by tourism, both natural and cultural, are consumptive, making them renewable. The economic benefit of tourism should reach all the stakeholders of the tourism industry. There are different definitions for sustainable tourism which are developed in the last 15 years. Most of the definitions emphasize that all tourists are responsible for respecting and conserving the local economic, environmental, cultural and social system. As one of the fastest growing industry of the world, this growth will place great stress on biodiverse habitats. Tourists should be aware of these changes and should take all precautions to protect the existing conditions. The tourist should be well informed about the following aspects before visiting a place: the economic conditions, the political setup, the socio-cultural aspects of the destination that they plan to visit. They should respect the local culture and should not disturb them. Contribute to the intercultural and multicultural development. Support the local economy by purchasing the items locally available. Moving on to the third module, planning for sustainable tourism development. The sustainable development approach implies that the natural, cultural and other resources of tourism should be conserved for future use. This approach is important because most of the tourism development depends on attractions and activities related to natural, environmental, historical, heritage and cultural pattern of the destination. If these resources are degraded or destroyed, then tourism may not attract people. The United Nations World Tourism Organization has defined sustainable tourism as tourism which leads to management of all resources in such a way that economic, social and aesthetic needs can be fulfilled while maintaining cultural integrity, essential ecological process, biological diversity and the support system. Over the last 15 years, sets of principles have been developed to put these ideas into practice. These principles identified with sustainable tourism have 4 pillars: economic, ecological, cultural, social or community sustainability. Economic sustainability. It should be made profitable in short term as well as long term basis. It should involve all the stakeholders in the planning process as well as in the implementation process. From the supply chain mechanism from micro level to multinational companies, provide professional training to all the concerned persons. Diversify the product by developing a wide range of tourism activities. A percentage of income generated shall be used for further development. Provide financial incentives to all the stakeholders to maintain sustainability. Ecological and environmental sustainability. Environment may be defined as the sum total of all conditions that affects the development and life of all organs. The human environment consists of physical, biological and social influences. The environment may also be defined as the sum total of substances and focuses external to the organism in such a manner that it affects the organism's survival. Since the life of a man is regulated by air, water, land, flora and fauna, they automatically became the constituents of the man's environment. This environment is in a continuing state of change. Environment would include not only immediate surroundings but also a variety of matters connected with human activity and become an important environmental factor with respect to other members in an ecosystem. People have always cared for the environments through their perceptions of environmental issues, and their attitudes have changed over the periods. In the beginning of the previous century, environmentalism was essentially concerned with wildlife conservation. Since 1960s, environmentalism has become a movement with widespread popular support. The United Nations Conference on the Human Environment assembled in Stockholm in 1972 was a turning point in the history of environmental awareness. Growing public pressure backed by scientific findings in the early 70s on pollution and environmental degradations stimulated the necessary political will. This environmental movement became severe with all aspects of natural environments, land and water, air, living organisms, the atmosphere, climate, ocean, outer space and all other resources. Therefore, environment is a complicated dynamic system with many interesting components. Our knowledge of these components of interaction between and of relationship between people, resources, environment and development has undergone radical changes in the last 2 decades. Now, people have realized that unless development is guided by environmental, social, cultural and ethical consideration, it will have more negative impact than its benefit. Cultural sustainability. Cultural tourism designates a system of relationship involving people through interaction which is based on the principle of give and take. The process of interaction is crucial to understand the symbolic character of relationship between the tourist and the host community. Surrounding and influencing the actual tourist-host contact is a range of input which has a great influence in building up the relationship. Since the guest and the host does not represent one homogeneous group and possess innumerable diversities, geographical, social, cultural, economic, etc., the impact is to be understood in view of these diversities. In other words, the nature of the impact depends upon the nature of culture which the tourists represent. Thus, the interaction between the host and guest involves the intricacies and complexities. Multiculture. Tourism should develop multiculture and the good things from each culture should be adopted. But many a times the local people may be attracted about the visitor's culture, which in the long run will harm the local culture. Therefore, all steps should be taken to preserve and protect cultural diversity. Strengthen, nurture and encourage the community's ability to maintain the traditional living style. Educate all the stakeholders about the acceptable behavior in the destination. The local culture of the destination may be grouped under the following 4 categories: industrial and highly civilized culture, the culture practiced by common people in the society, the agrarian culture or rural culture where most of the agriculture lives, the tribal culture where mostly tribal lives. Interaction between culture. Each of the above type of society has a different set of values, customs and traditions, norms and usages that shapes the attitude, beliefs and perceptions of its members. These contents of the social order prepare the response of the members that develop an outlook about the world around them. When an interaction takes place between any two cultural groups, there comes into action a set of responses that determines the basis of relationship between the host and the guest. The main question arises, when does this interaction leads to imbalance in the culture and tourism relation. A close look into the position of the interacting parties would reveal the situation where the tourist exercise a commanding and dominating position and the host community is at the receiving end. This is based on the premise that tourist brings economic benefit to the local people. The culture of the host faces subordination to the culture of the tourist. Since the industrial society forms the major part of the tourism market and the destinations, the degree of culture impact will be less in comparison to the society where common people and agriculture lives, because the cultural gap between the guest and the host is less. Greater the culture gap, higher will be negative impact. The host in such situation becomes subservient to the wants and demands of the tourist. The beginning of impact takes place at the periphery and then gradually percolates to the core of the cultural system. The damage to culture is more when the system at the core is influenced. The core of the culture comprises of the ideals and principles over which the entire edifice of culture is based. The core culture provides the distinct identity of the people and the system of the values, norms and beliefs which is designed to preserve the core. The culture faces the identity crisis when tourism as a force to the host culture disturbs the harmony of the core. The above points amply makes it clear that negative social impact of tourism on the culture arises because of the community's inability to protect itself from the dominating part of the tourist culture. The host subservient to the demands and expectations of the tourist, and as a result the culture starts changing to the tastes and likings of the tourists. There is no end to these changes, and ultimately a situation of imbalance in the culture of local community may end up its extinction. To preserve, protect and promote local culture, there is a need to develop community-based tourism. Coming to the fourth module, tourism and environment. The relationship between tourism and environment is one of the delicate balances between development and protecting environment. A number of types of tourism are directly related to environment, such as adventure tourism, wildlife tourism, beach tourism, nature tourism, water sports, etc. With rapid development of tourism all over the world, many people and environmentalists are more concerned about impact of tourism on environment. Tourism impact are categorized as direct or on-site and indirect or off-site. The following are some of the impacts: soil erosion and compaction, disturbances to wildlife, spoiling of natural vegetation, littering and vandalism, water and air pollution, reclamation of land for destination development. Realizing the significance of environment on tourism, an effort is made to conduct a research in terms of understanding relationship between tourism and environment. The study examines the impact of tourism on environment in global perspectives. The study suggests some of the strategic options as to how tourism can be used as a tool for conservation. The study points out that environment, whether man-made or natural, is an essential component of tourism. It suggests that integration of tourism into overall policy for sustainable development, focusing on environmental impact assessment, strategic management of tourism development involving all the stakeholders, technological adoptions and regular monitoring of the compliance procedure. Environmental planning. A basic technique in achieving sustainable development is the environmental planning approach. Environmental planning requires that all elements of the environments be carefully surveyed, analyzed and considered in determining the most appropriate destination development. Guidelines for tourism operations shall be well established. Impact assessment and its proper monitoring mechanism have to be set up. Formulate national, regional and local tourism policies and strategies that are constituents with the overall objectives of the sustainable development. Ensure that the designs, planning, development and operational facilities incorporate sustainability principles. Continuous monitoring of impact assessment is to be ensured. Responsible tourism concept has to be developed among the tourists. Moving on to the last module, community-based tourism. It is a concept where local community is taken into confidence from the inception of the destination development planning. The following steps should be taken to protect the culture of the host community. The representatives of the community at the destination should have greater participation and involvement in the decision making process. The over-exploitation of resources of the destination should not be allowed. Enough resources should be preserved for future use. The people at the destination should have adequate means and mechanism to identify their cultural priorities and should be allowed to take all precautions to protect it. The economic benefits from tourism should reach all the stakeholders of the destination. The share of the community should be determined in relation to the loss suffered by them on account of destination development. Sustainable steps should be taken to address the problems of inequality and indifferences at the level of local culture. In this context, sustainability should be interpreted to conserve core culture without compromising on the ability of the culture and its people to deliver economic benefits from tourism. An important aspect of sustainable tourism development is emphasizing community-based tourism. This approach focuses on the community involvement in the planning and development process. The local people shall be fully informed about the tourism activities. The local community should be benefited by getting additional employment and income. Proper education and training should be given to locals and develop the destination on inclusive growth concept. Recognizing that Tourism provides an opportunity to travel and to know other culture. Development of tourism can help promote closer ties and better understanding among different communities. Various international organizations have taken decisions to preserve, protect and develop cultural tourism. The Universal Declaration Human Rights by the UNO and regional conventions on tourism has given importance to the development of cultural tourism. So, we can conclude the session. Tourism development shall be based on the principles of sustainability, which means that it must be ecologically bearable as well as economically viable, ethically and socially equitable for the local communities in the long run. Tourism activities should be integrated with the natural, cultural and the human environment. Tourism must consider its long-term effects on cultural heritage and traditional elements. The living style of the local community should be least disturbed. All efforts should be made to preserve, protect and promote the existing ecology, environment and socio-cultural fabrics of the local community. Thank you.